We're here to talk about the future of enterprise and blockchain, what that means. So I'm Kelley Weaver. I am the CEO and founder of Melrose PR. We are an LA-based blockchain-focused communications agency. And I also host a podcast called Crypto Token Talk. And I'm going to let my panelists, esteemed panelists, go down the line and introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they work on.
So my name is Brook, and I'm the founder and CEO of a blockchain company called MetaX. And we're based in Santa Monica, and we're building an open platform called AdChain for digital advertising.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pei. So I'm a director at Consensus. It's a blockchain production studio headquartered in Brooklyn, New York. I was previously CEO of Token Foundry, which is a advisory and fundraising platform for utility token projects. And prior to that, I spent a number of years at Goldman Sachs working on the fixed income products and projects.
Hi guys, Jay. I'm work in Block One in product marketing. Block One is one of the major contributors to the ESIO software platform.
Dude. Hi, I'm David Moss. I work at Strongblock, CEO at Strongblock, and prior to this, I was the second employee in the United States for Block One building EOSIO. I led development and developer relations there and left to work on enterprise blockchains.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So to help build the foundation for this discussion, can you guys explain in your own words sort of to our audience the difference and the main advantages and disadvantages of a public versus a private blockchain and what you think is best for an enterprise setting? I'll let any of you take the lead on that.
Sure, I guess I can kick it off. And so really, taking a step back, what problems are you trying to solve? A lot of misconceptions of companies have been, we need a blockchain, right? So let's get a blockchain, and then the engineers are like, what color blockchain do you want? And so it's just really understanding the technology, how it works, and the comfort level of transparency for the organization or the group of participants within a blockchain network. And so there's trade-offs when you consider distributed ledger architecture. And so a public blockchain is one that has a consensus algorithm, and there's mining, and there's this consensus that is, what is a public blockchain. And then the private blockchains are and still have that inherent trust element that you need. And so, and then there's hybrid approaches that are becoming more popular, where you have elements of a public blockchain in the architecture and components of a platform that are anchored to a public blockchain, but you still have the ability to control the public nature of transactions or what is public throughout the network.
Yeah, I think those agreed with everything you just said, and I think in my eyes, public and private blockchain, which in my world, I think I'm most familiar with Ethereum. So I'm going to kind of start with that. And I think they all share some similar characteristics, right? So you all see smart contracts being used, and they share the same sort of libraries and resources for dev purpose. And you also have the same sort of open source software community support. But I think what really differentiates private or permissioned Ethereum is that you really have a choice in terms of consensus algorithm. So for public Ethereum, for instance, by default, you're going with proof of work currently, and then you're transitioning to proof of stake. But in the world of private Ethereum, that you can choose with IBFT, you can go with proof of authority. There's raft, and how you come to agreement and determine that finality throughout the process of adding the blocks to the chain is really different. And of course, and I think the reason, a strong drive behind the momentum recently that we see in the enterprise or private blockchain is really like the need of security and permission, right? The peer permissioning level really provides a level of comfort for companies come together and do some large-scale projects.
Yeah, I think when people are looking at why blockchain, you often land on sort of the accountability and the provenance and the trust of data. So really what it comes down to, the difference between the public and private is essentially your governance. What is that consensus mechanism? EOSIO specifically having built-in governance functionalities allows you to, as you were sort of saying, pick and structure how you handle that governance. So if it's a private situation with semi-trusted parties, you have a way to determine then who is operating those nodes and how are you then validating that data. In a public situation, that trust is then still up to the same consensus algorithm in our case anyway, and then you're just looking at public nodes that are validating that data.
Yeah, I want to, just riffing on what you guys are all talking about, the way that I look at it is we're all going with blockchain. The internet is great, right? The information has been out there for a long time, and there's always been this problem with trust and a single source of truth on the information. And the way that we look at it at StrongBlock, and the way that I've been looking at it, is the single source of truth, regardless of whether or not it's a private blockchain or a semi-private or a public blockchain, internal in enterprises using it just to be able to keep all of their different groups around the world auditable, and it's not just a centralized database, so you can have different nodes running. Some information being exposed in a public environment, but it's not all the information exposed, so it's what Ken was talking about. And then also just a pure public mainnet, like the current EOS mainnet. All those things are blockchain, but blockchain really is about the single source of truth. And the blockchain is all about the idea of, once we introduced cryptography, you had the ability to create a chain that could not be, that was irreversible, immutable. That's the whole thing that we're going for, is that once you have that information, somebody can't mess around with the books. That's triple entry ledger, right? Triple entry ledger was all about adding that witness capability onto double entry that had been around since the Medicis.
So we all know that blockchain is not a catch-all solution, and I want to talk about what challenges in enterprise is blockchain specifically well addressed to, or well suited to address. And maybe David, you can take this one.
Oh, sure. Well, again, all of us can answer these questions. Everybody here has been working in those areas. Well, directly inside of enterprises, what we're seeing, we've been talking over the last, it's almost been a year, talking with various enterprises, and I did that at Block 1 as well. And we're seeing overall that their internal use cases are sometimes a little harder to figure out than their consortium use cases. And the way that we look at it is consortium governance. If you're talking about the governance of multiple different groups all coming together to be able to work, the consortium governance approach looks just like a consortium contract. Even if there were no blockchain at all, they still have to go through all of the governance things to figure out how they work with each other and how they supply each other, how competitors are able to also be in co-opetition with each other. And so in the enterprise, what they're doing is they're doing some projects internally, but they're actually mostly working on consortia and public-facing things, and then they're going back and saying, oh, now we see how we can do it with internal. And so that's what we're seeing, and I think that that's one of the things, especially with the VACT project that you should talk about. It's amazing. That's one of the things that we're seeing is consortia are adopting it, but the enterprises are doing that because they don't want to, the disintermediators, the intermediation groups that are out there right now that are doing the middleman stuff, they're going to go away, and so what they want to do is become facilitators, and so that's what consortia are allowing them to do. So that's where we're seeing the biggest early movement in blockchain and enterprises.
I think I'll definitely echo that statement that consortia is a great opportunity for, and we've seen a lot over the past few years, things like Hyperledger have been putting together an opportunity for these large companies to experiment with the technology and to figure out what they can do with blockchain. Everyone talks about provenance and accountability and source of truth data, but how does that work on a global stage when you're looking at multiple industry players trying to work together versus an individual company and what my internal problems are? And if I'm someone who deals with a massive supply chain with 10,000 different suppliers, what is my semi-trusted situation where I know we're all sort of working towards an end goal, but we all need a single source of truth to still rely on? And what can we utilize blockchain for in that situation in order to, I guess, make sure we all stay aligned and have some amount of accountability?
Yeah, and I think, speaking from my years of experience working on the traditional finance side, and I think the challenges that blockchain is well positioned to address in the world of financial services or other industries is like those stem from their biggest frustrations, right? So what I think is there are two types of frustrations. One is record keeping or bookkeeping, and then the other is, those are static information. And then there's the transaction-oriented activities that is causing a lot of inefficiency. So I almost think that, the challenge that enterprise blockchain or blockchain can really look into and try to solve is, going through the process where currently a lot of banks, for instance, are spending a lot of resources and money into strengthening their data control and data management process. And that actually, yes, one side they put more people on that line of work, and on the other side they're causing inefficiency and waste of resources. So how can we sort of look into that process and plug in the transparency and the timestamps and real data and distributed ledgers into throughout that life cycle of any asset class, and starting with the issuance, tokenizing or not, and then look past trading and address those post-trading activities, how you asset servicing your clients better, how do you automate the reporting and bookkeeping process for your clients, and then to how can you settle quicker, faster, and more accurately with all your counterparties across the world, right? So I think intermediaries or disintermediation is one use case or one application of blockchain, but that's not the whole point of blockchain. And I think we're not here trying to take out custodians. We're not here to take out all the CSDs, the central securities depositories. We're here to kind of help them pivot their business models and even challenge the current consortia business where DTCC is, for instance, sponsored by all banks. So it's not for profit, it's non-profit almost. But they are also faced with a lot of problems. They're constantly doing projects and mandates with the street, with all the banks together, right? Trying to innovate, trying to net their trades faster. So all of that comes back to, I think, companies just have to look into their frustration and pain points and try to identify value and capture that value with the right partners from the technology side.
Yeah, and I think consortiums have been a great place for companies to come together at the enterprise level to express frustrations, to talk about how this new technology could potentially help solve some of the issues. It's also just been an environment for experiments and running experiments, and then taking those learnings back to their respective business or industry, and then have a better understanding of what maybe new standards could exist for that particular industry. Because oftentimes there are companies that are in competition, in direct competition, that are still willing to potentially work together and collaborate in a way that can still serve their own personal or self-interest, but also take advantage of the efficiencies in this new technology. And looking at just the supply chain for that particular industry is something that has been, I think, an obvious example of these consortiums is, okay, how can we work together? How can we better collaborate? And how can we take advantage of these efficiencies and also look at value creation in different ways?
Do you think that's ultimately how things are going to get pushed along and ahead? I mean, how have the conversations like with the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance been, for example, since its formation a couple years ago?
So the EEA, from our experience, we helped found the advertising working group, and it's really been, high level, participation, but ultimately it's been designed, our working group at least within the EEA has been designed to introduce Ethereum technology to the advertising and marketing industry and provide almost a consulting, layer to help get them familiar and comfortable with starting to experiment, or be willing to test and run pilots, where a pilot could exist, where participants within the advertising industry can participate.
There's been some criticism around private blockchain or enterprise blockchains that there's no real need. How would you address some of that criticism? Meaning, yeah.
Sure. That's what I was kind of alluding to earlier on, is that I think that enterprises themselves are trying to figure that out. There was a big rush a couple of years ago for them to start actually using blockchain, as Ken was talking about, the any color, give me a mauve blockchain, whatever. But what's really started to change is that their understanding, and this is the example that I had, just an energy company, a United States energy company that we're talking to yesterday, was going through this process where they started off looking at internal things and they were all excited and they had all these different pilot projects, and then the crypto winter came along and then they said, well, gee, is that crypto? Do we have to have a token? What do we need to do? They got confused. They stopped talking about it. And then they went to the consortia, and now they're working with consortia out there and actually getting things done. And in the call yesterday, it was about halfway through the call, they go, wow, we really see where we can start doing this internally. So how do they do that internally? They still have multiple different groups all over the place that still have to work interdepartmentally, basically, so intra-organizationally, not inter-organizationally. They have to be able to talk with those different groups, and there's not a single source of truth. Even with electronic data interchange and all of the other stuff, those things still get lost. Something in one department doesn't know what another department is doing, even within the same company. That happens all the time when we're talking with, I was just in Europe for the last 3 weeks, talking with banks and other companies over there. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Does blockchain solve that? It actually allows them to have that conversation with a single source of truth about things that they're working on and get rid of those efficiencies. They're seeing that even basically intra-organizationally now. So that's where the need comes. Is it private? Do they have individual parts of their organization run nodes? Do they use proof of authority or some other thing that you've got a facilitator, not an intermediator out there, and have that so that that group is helping make sure that all of the data is actually on the blockchain and is correct and the source is correct? That's where it's going internally for enterprises, from what we've been talking with.
I think a lot of the criticism comes potentially from a place of not understanding necessarily what exactly the blockchain is supposed to do. So if you come into this expecting an answer immediately, rather than looking at maybe more open-mindedly like a consortium would, and to see what the solution could be, these things take time. The internet wasn't invented in a day. Blockchain feels like it had its big heyday with some of the things that happened over the last few years, but quite honestly, it's still nascent technology that is looking for exactly the best way to be implemented in a lot of these situations. So I would say there has been substantial progress in that sense. There are different ways that people are approaching how to handle consensus, how to handle the way that the data is being validated, can be seen as progress, and maybe that source of contention maybe comes from not necessarily understanding the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think ultimately we would like to see, of course, everybody's on the mainnet and thousands of computers nodes act honestly and validate things the way they should be, but I almost see enterprise blockchain as a necessary step to get us to the future of blockchain, or a better infrastructure for financial services and other industries. Is currently, if you look at all the activities out there, everything involves multiple parties, right? So all the infrastructure is so entrenched with, take the finance, for instance, you have investor, you have broker, you have settlement, and you have everybody in the middle. It's hard for one of those companies and get out and then just say, hey, I'm going to do a project and that's going to change our activities entirely, because it's impossible. So how are you going to carry out a meaningful and good sized project and actually would lead to the mass adoption that would, that requires some sort of partnerships, consortia, organizations together. People have to, especially institutions, need to feel comfortable that they can have a safe environment. They can sit down and talk about issues and frustrations and talk about some experiments, not just go all the way, but one step at a time, without tearing down the whole world, right? Yeah. So I think that's why enterprise blockchain, I think, makes sense, but we'll give it a few years and see how that goes, and maybe we should just go straight to the public chain.
They have the biggest problems to solve, right? Like they have the opportunity to utilize blockchain to solve the largest challenges across big industries. At the same time, that's their kryptonite, because they also have a lot of legacy systems that they need to figure out how this new blockchain thing is supposed to fit in. And if blockchain is presenting one piece of the solution to the problem, then they need to work together and figure out how do we then align all these other things that we're doing in all these other different departments and systems into what this new blockchain solution could be.
Right. Some of that has to do with cost management
Definitely.
and reduction,
And
right?
also, how do you avoid getting in a situation where you've gone out, and we've talked with a number of companies that have done this. We were talking backstage about this. One company that we're working with, they did an ICO. They were going to do a blockchain for their industry, and I won't even say the industry. And they failed. They fired everybody, but they raised a lot of money, and so they need to still come out with a blockchain, but they couldn't find engineers who actually were able to do it. And they were trying to invent their own protocol, and everybody wants to invent their own blockchain protocol, and everybody wants to do one-off implementations of everything. That's a problem, and I think that's one of the things that needs to be solved, that we're working on. But that's one of the things that needs to be solved is the one-off approach and finding enough good blockchain engineers. It's a struggle because it's so brand new, and so people are throwing money at it. Well, here's our blockchain project. Go out and hire 100 people. Where are you going to find 100 blockchain engineers? They're not out
It's a
there.
fundamental shift in the way that we're approaching technology, and I
Yeah.
think that's why it is such a challenge and a question that it takes a lot of large enterprises or a lot of people, developers, to really be sourcing and figuring out what this problem is and how we're going to solve it.
Yeah,
And I
I'm
think
very
it's
big in building
also-
black boxes.
Yeah, it's also a layered approach as well, though. I mean, so obviously Solidity is a language that programmers have been trained in, and there's more engineering mindshare around the Ethereum ecosystem, and we're built on Ethereum. But as we work into like second layer development, and we're starting to see these bridges and the ability to interoperate now.
Yeah.
And so we're starting to see how we can potentially work with this company who has built on Hyperledger. And so it's kind of a time of transition from our perspective, where we can start to collaborate and work with other teams that have built on different blockchains or different stacks.
That brings up the really big thing of interoperability and inter-blockchain communication, or IBC. That's really where a lot of this is going to go, and something that I've been advocating for the last couple of years. And that's really the big push, is that all of us on stage here with our different respective projects working together to help solve those problems, being able to go transactionally across the different blockchains. That's really not there yet. That's really not something that's ready yet, and it really is going to take some more work. And also people just realizing that they have to collaborate. It's not a winner-takes-all thing where it's just going to be Ethereum or just going to be EOSIO or just going to be Hyperledger. It's going to be a combination of those things. It's like the browser wars, and it's like the even going back to the various .com things. Everything goes through that cycle of lots of people coming up with protocols. There are some basic protocols out there, and we're working on the top protocols right now. So.
That's a challenge, right? Defining the standard that it's all going to operate on, and how does that standard work together with other existing systems?
So a lot of different use cases have been mentioned, but what are some other specific, sort of pilots that you've seen, that you've come across that you think are particularly promising, or good examples of this working at a small scale, obviously, right now?
Well,
I can probably
the
take that one.
Yeah.
So there are two projects I'm especially excited about. The first one being Comgo. It's a enterprise blockchain project backed by 15 international institutions, including banks, trading companies, and oil giants. They come together in Europe and working with our company Consensus to try to build this trade finance platform. So what's that going to do, right? So there are just so many boundaries and different antiquated processes existing in the trade finance world, especially in there are so many small countries together. That process is super manual right now. So what we are trying to do is we're going to set up a blockchain network for all those consortia members, and we're going to look into specific use cases such as letters of credit and oil commodity management, and we're going to try to eliminate the paperwork as much as possible, and we're going to automate the ledger process, and so everybody has more transparency into real-time transactions. So that's supply chain management use case. And the other one is called Liquid Share. So Liquid Share is a trading platform, and the asset class involved in that project is small, medium enterprises businesses, so SMEs. So their stocks currently aren't traded very publicly, and they have to be traded off the private platforms. there are Euroclear and Euronext, those companies in the middle to facilitate that process, but the liquidity is not there. So what we do is we're going to help them write smart contracts, and we're going to bring in the key stakeholders, which is custodians, brokers, investors. Three of them. We aren't necessarily talking to CSDs right now at the moment because we believe that the decentralized demand and supply can make that process happen. So we're creating a platform basically to help illiquid assets, historically illiquid assets, to trade more liquidly. So adding that extra layer and access for all the small and big investors in the market that didn't have the gate to get into this market, so now they can actually trade. So those are, I think that's the trading and financial services platform. So I think there are a lot of barriers can be lifted in that space.
I'm excited about decentralized IDs. It's not a blockchain, but it's more of a framework or schema that seems to be gaining momentum, where there's a network of attestations that can prove identity, and this identity is owned by the individual, and companies or applications being developed can support these DIDs for their systems, and so I'm excited to see that develop, and that could be potentially a standard for Web3. We'll see. Identity is obviously a very important component to this, and so with identity and reputation, I think that is going to be something we need to get right. And I don't think it should be centralized on any one particular technology.
Yeah, agreed. That's one of the primary things in being able to move forward on public mainnets is identity and attestation. And there are a lot of different groups, consortia that are working on it. There are individual organizations working on it. And that's the thing, that once you've got that, then we were talking about going to mainnets. Well, then you can be on a mainnet, but you know that you can do a trustless transaction because you know who the other person is. They've gone through KYC or whatever. It's your passport or your global entry on the blockchain. That takes a lot, like all the other things, it takes a lot of different people cooperating, a lot of different groups cooperating, because my ID, it has to be globally recognized. We probably all have global entry in passports and all the other stuff like that. Makes it easier to go in and across borders. Not everyone has those, but they're all done through the United States. It's all Homeland Security and through the border groups. When you're doing that, then you've got to have all the cooperation of all those people to make that work. So that's what I'm really fascinated about as well. Are we going to have digital IDs that are government issued, and does that defeat the purpose? But how do you know whether you're working with somebody who's a trusted person if you're not putting those things together? So ID is a big part of that.
There's also your digital ID tied to your social media.
Yeah.
And what does your social media say about your digital ID? And I think it's one of the areas that a lot of people have been sort of looking at in what blockchain is going to do. But yeah, definitely bringing it back to your identity and who am I, and sort of that being a root of a lot of all this.
You were talking just to answer the rest of that question. You're talking about, well, what are some examples there? Yeah. We're working with supply chain, individual companies working on supply chain, but typically they're working with all of their various partners. Some of the big ones have thousands of different outside partners, and so in some cases they're trying to make that happen. You're all familiar with the Ibm Maersk Project, and that's built on Hyperledger. And one of the things they've been having a hard time with is getting people to actually use it, because right now the way that it's constructed is Maersk owns the data or has control of the data. Now, maybe that's changing, but the last time I read about it, which was fairly recently, they were having a hard time making that work because of that, because you want people to join in. You want people to be able to do that. So supply chain is probably the single biggest thing out there that's a low-hanging fruit, because they're always looking for ways to make things efficient there. We're working on another area called detention, which is also in supply chain, which is trucks and transport. And so all the different groups that are working on trucks and transport, detention is the basic idea of you've got a truck, you're at a dock in Long Beach Harbor or Los Angeles Harbor, and you've been waiting for an hour and a half. Who pays you? You're not paid when you're sitting there. So you actually do get compensated, but then they've got to reconcile it. But whose data do you look to? So it's a problem that hasn't been solved, by the way. There are many problems out there like that. So anything around supply chain, logistics, transportation, detention, all of those things are getting solved. Then commodities trading. not just one commodity, but multi-commodities, being able to have an exchange that allows you on the blockchain to go back and forth between gold and oil and various things like that. That's another area we're working in. And then just oil and gas energy as well. We're seeing a ton of projects. I can't disclose names, unfortunately, right now. We're doing these all in private alpha and beta. But we're seeing a lot of activity, and I know that all the groups here are seeing some great activity out there. And so we're really seeing it this year. Once the crypto winter happened, everybody got serious about blockchain. It was great. It was great. I'm excited.
And the commodity that's traded in advertising is people's data, and this is why Facebook is exploring, blockchain technology to solve some of their issues, because they're experiencing forces from both their users as well as the government. When we have these data privacy laws that are coming out, how do you comply with different data privacy laws in different areas of the world? When you're a global, digital media company, it's challenging, and so
that's huge. Yeah, the $1 billion, the rumored $1 billion crypto decentralized Facebook thing is a huge move in that direction.
Right.
Which still comes back to the accountability and the trust of the data, right? Like, have I given Facebook, like whatever company, right, like explicit authorization to use my data in whatever way they're going to use it? If they say they're going to monetize my data, did I agree to that at some point? And
you're the product.
Yeah.
And if you can't own your data, then that's where all of this is moving towards, is can I own my data? Can I own my DNA data? 23andMe has rights to do all sorts of stuff with my DNA data. Facebook has all sorts of rights. We're the product. It's just a giant behavior modification system, not really a social network that they're using to do, manipulate elections and other things like that. So that's where decentralization, owning your own identity, having control of your identity is going to make a huge difference in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think just the proliferation and the invention and proliferation of Internet 2.0 has unfairly given internet giants like Facebook,
Platforms.
Google the access, and nobody ever really stood up and against them and then questioned their accessibility to user data and how they use what they do with those data, right? So I think with our community, we're trying to rethink that problem and reimagine the landscape and who should be really owning those data. If you're the user and you have your medical history, you have your social media profile, and I should be the person to monetize those data, and I should be the person who control and set up the conditions and access levels for different enterprises out there. They just happen to provide me services, but currently there's no way for them to do that, right? So there's leakage of identity, there's identity theft, there are a lot of really bad actors out there. Enterprise business can only do so much to protect user data while using their data, selling or trading them off. So I think it's just a very unbalanced landscape right now, and then wasn't done properly. So I think it all gives us a chance right now to kind of question that ecosystem and say, okay, so what do we do that we can protect set up the standards for DID and self-governed, self-sovereign data, and how do we also interact with the governments and the historical authority organizations to co-manage the data, right? Because we don't want to just shut down the gate, but at the same time, I think it's reasonable to ask for more control of my data, and how do I do with what do I do with them?
That's the segue into enterprises, because that's what we're all talking about is enterprises. But enterprises have to fundamentally change, because as platforms, especially the social network platforms that are out there, we were the product. Basically, we were the thing that was being sold to advertisers, and so that's changing within every enterprise. They've got to recognize that, well, the things that they've been building their data on, the massive data that's come out, it's big data, it's artificial intelligence, it's blockchain, it's Internet of Things, all these things are converging. And looking at what's happening with enterprises, they have to recognize the fact that they're not going to be able to, in the future, collect that amount of data and control it and figure out how to do the behavior modification stuff that they're doing. That's what's going to fundamentally change. And so just to make sure that they're competitive in the future, they're going to have to embrace some of those decentralization tools as well. So that's where a lot of these things are going to start morphing over the next, like I said, the next decade.
Do you feel like that's why Microsoft, Facebook, everyone's come out that they're hiring blockchain developers? It's sort of like a defense and sort of a pivot of strategy?
That's an interesting question. It's hard to know exactly why they're doing it, but I think that people want to not miss out on blockchain. Are they doing it because they wish to decentralize the world and hand things back, people's individual data back to their control, or do they want to just make sure that they control it themselves? That was the thing that I was alluding to earlier on, is that right now there's intermediaries, there's middle people that are doing all of these things, and the thing that they're going to morph towards is being facilitators, and there are many large organizations out there that are intermediate organizations that are going to have to become facilitator organizations, and they're going to go away because we're just going to all be connected to each other. But there's still going to need to be those facilitators working on those things. So I think that even at that level, the groups that we're talking to on finance and everything else, they're also very painfully aware that they could get disrupted, and so that's why they're doing it. But I don't think that they're all that certain exactly what's going to happen. They made big bets, right? What happened to all the big crypto bets that all these people were making, and everybody was going to have their own cryptocurrency, and all this cool stuff was going to happen. Crypto winter came, and they all abandoned all those projects. So,
regardless of the motivation, I think it's good to see the growth of development in the industry, developers, and even if those are places where individual developers work and they learn more about blockchain through that mechanism, that all still makes the ecosystem and the environment better, because those people will go get other jobs or go work in other places, and they will fundamentally just improve the quality of development in blockchain across the board.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, it's a strategy that they're investing in to sort of prepare for the future merging of different versions of internet, right? So I think what happened to some of the current industries, like they'll get on board with a new infrastructure when their users are looking that direction, their clients are requesting exposure, they have to get on it. So if Facebook's new users are all using digital assets and wallets and they're decentralized and everywhere, they demand more control of their data, transparency, than what's the technology that can help them achieve that goal. Probably not the current control and features of the platform. So I think it's there is almost unstoppable drive behind those strategic decisions, because they have to invest in that direction. Just they've got those requests from some key stakeholders, and they're trying to think what would be the necessary steps to take to actually position themselves in the most cost-effective way to merge on to the next version of infrastructure. So I think it's smart for Airbnb, JetBlue, Facebook, all the other big businesses, Fortune 500 companies. They're pretty much, I would say like over 80% of them are thinking about looking into POC pilot or a real production environment to set up test out with some of the business lines, and it's definitely a good move.
The same way that they did with the internet. I agree. That's exactly what we're seeing too, is that the same way they did with the internet, they're experimenting. They don't know exactly how it's going to affect them. In some cases, it transformed their business. In other cases, not so much. So, but yes, that's why they're hiring those developers and starting to make a push towards blockchain. They don't want to be left behind.
You see that across all emerging technologies, though. VR certainly had a similar heyday where every media company is figuring out what they do with VR. I don't know if that's necessarily still a thing. And with other, even like when everyone now has a mobile app for what they do, that was still something you had to invest new development resources in, experiment with, and figure out why my company, who had a website for all these years, now needs to have an app. I think we're in a similar situation with blockchain where we're all seeing investment into it, and I think I saw a stat that worldwide investment in blockchain actually doubled this year over last year, or close to something like 90%. And that speaks to kind of the efficacy of people at least learning in the space, even if necessarily all the goals and solutions aren't clear yet.
Even if some of it's FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So some of it's FOMO, but no matter what, you never want to say, we missed the internet, now we're going to miss blockchain. We missed the internet, we missed mobile, now we're going to miss blockchain. Nobody wants to be the person who did that. So,
all right, we're out of time, so I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much.